If you ask a young American on the street to describe the founding fathers, the answer you often hear is they were old, white, slave owning men. And that's about it. While they were actually quite young, the other things are true, but it's not the full history of who they were. In this video, let's look at not just a founding father, but the founding father of America, George Washington, the founding father of a nation. In the early 1700s, the lush, rolling hills of Virginia were dotted with tobacco plantations and the homes of colonial families. One of those colonial families was the Washington family, home to a future president of the United States of America. Born on February 22, 1732, in Westmoreland County, Virginia, George was the eldest son of Augustine and Mary Ball Washington. His family was part of the colonial aristocracy, owning land and a number of slaves, which was common in that era. Young George grew up on the family's plantation Ferry Farm along the Rappahannock River. He spent his childhood exploring the woods, fishing in the river, and helping with the daily chores around the farm. Despite the challenges of frontier life, George's family ensured he received a proper education. He was taught by various tutors and attended a school where he learned reading, writing, and arithmetic. George's father passed away when he was just 11 years old, though. This event had a profound impact on him, thrusting him into a position of responsibility at a young age. This also left little money to support the formal education of young George. He was mostly a self-taught, lifelong learner. Washington's formal schooling ended by the time he was 15, but his pursuit of knowledge continued throughout his life. He read to become a better soldier, farmer, and eventual president. He corresponded with authors and friends in America and Europe, and he exchanged ideas that fed the ongoing agricultural, social, and political revolutions of his day. George admired his older half-brother Lawrence Washington, who became a father figure to him. Lawrence owned the estate of Mount Vernon, which George would one day inherit. As George grew into his teenage years, he developed an interest in surveying. This profession was essential in the colonies, where vast tracts of land were being mapped and settled. At the age of 16, George joined a surveying expedition into the Shenandoah Valley, a rugged and beautiful region of Virginia. This experience honed his skills and gave him a taste for adventure in the outdoors. George's talent for surveying earned him a commission as the official surveyor of Culpeper County, Virginia, at the age of just 17. His work was highly respected, and it provided him with a steady income, allowing him to purchase his first parcels of land. By the age of 21, George was already a landowner and a respected figure in his community. In 1753, as tensions between the British and French in North America began to rise, George Washington was appointed as a major in the Virginia militia. He was just 21 years old, but his reputation as a capable leader had already begun to grow. His first mission was to deliver a message to the French warning them to leave the Ohio Valley, a region claimed by both Britain and France. The French refused to leave, and the conflict known as the French and Indian War soon erupted. George played a crucial role in the early battles of the war. In 1754, he led a small force to confront the French at Fort Duquesne. Although his troops were defeated, George's bravery and leadership did not go unnoticed. The following year, he served as an aide to General Edward Braddock during a disastrous expedition against the French. Braddock was killed in battle, and Washington took command, rallying the troops and leading them to safety. After the war, George returned to Virginia, where he focused on managing his family's estate, Mount Vernon. He married Martha Custis, a wealthy widow with 2 children. The marriage brought him financial stability and a loving family. George and Martha worked together to expand and improve Mount Vernon, turning it into one of the most prosperous plantations in Virginia. They did own over 100 slaves, and it can be confusing how a man who led us to independence also owned people. This was a normal part of life in those times, and the sin of our past was something that Washington changed his views on over time. He was the only slave-owning president to free his slaves. Details on how many of his slaves were free and why some didn't want to leave due to family ties are in dispute, but what is not in dispute is that it was written into his will to free all of them. And when I say they did not want to leave, I don't mean they didn't want freedom. Everyone does. Many slaves knew their families would be split up if they left, so they had a hard choice to make when freedom from one slave owner was an option. George was active in local politics, serving in the Virginia House of Burgesses. He became known for his strong opinions on colonial rights and his opposition to British policies that he believed were unfair to the American colonists. As tensions between Britain and the colonies grew, George emerged as a leading voice for independence. The French and Indian War ended in 1763 with the Treaty of Paris, but the conflict had left the British government deeply in debt. To recoup their losses, they imposed a series of taxes on the American colonies, including the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act. These measures were deeply unpopular and sparked widespread protests. George Washington, like many colonists, was angered by the British policies. He believed that the colonies should have the same rights as British citizens, including representation in Parliament. George joined the growing movement for independence, attending the First Continental Congress in 1774 as a delegate from Virginia. In 1775, as tensions between the colonies and Britain escalated further, the Second Continental Congress convened in Philadelphia. The delegates faced a critical decision whether to seek reconciliation with Britain or to fight for independence. The battles of Lexington and Concord had already been fought, and the colonies were in open rebellion. Recognizing George Washington's leadership skills and military experience, the Congress appointed him Commander in Chief of the Continental Army. The 6'2" George accepted the position with humility and a deep sense of duty. As with any leader in battle, George Washington faced many challenges with the Continental Army as they fought the war. The British forces were well trained and well equipped, while the American soldiers were mostly untrained volunteers. Supplies were scarce, and the harsh conditions of war tested the resolve of the troops. One of the earliest and most significant battles was the Siege of Boston. George arrived in Cambridge, Massachusetts in July 1775 to take command of the Continental Army. He found the troops poorly supplied and lacking discipline. George worked tirelessly to organize and train his soldiers. In March 1776, George orchestrated a bold move to fortify Dorchester Heights, overlooking Boston. By placing cannons on the heights, he forced the British to evacuate the city. This victory boosted the morale of the American forces and demonstrated George's strategic abilities and the Patriots', as they had named themselves, ability to challenge the British. Remember, America was never expected to win this war. Britain was the world's superpower, and we were a ragtag group of rebels. And despite early success at Dorchester Heights, the war was far from over. The British launched a massive invasion of New York in the summer of 1776. George and his army fought bravely but were ultimately forced to retreat. The losses were severe, and the Continental Army was pushed across the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. As winter set in, the morale of the Continental Army was at an all-time low. George knew that he needed to take action to revive the spirits of his troops and reinvigorate the cause of independence. On the night of December 25, 1776, he led a daring and risky operation, the crossing of the Delaware River. In the midst of a snowstorm, George and his men crossed the icy river in small boats. The next morning, they launched a surprise attack on the Hessian forces stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. The victory was decisive, capturing nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers. This triumph was followed by another success at Princeton, bolstering the American cause and proving that the Continental Army could not only challenge but defeat the British. The winter of 1777 to 1778 was one of the darkest periods of the war. The Continental Army encamped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, endured brutal cold, starvation, and disease. Despite these hardships, George Washington's leadership was hard to miss. Instead of viewing himself as the one to be served and answered to, he worked tirelessly to secure supplies and improve the condition for his men. At Valley Forge, George's army received crucial training from Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian military officer. Von Steuben instilled discipline and drilled the soldiers, transforming them into a more effective fighting force. This training would prove invaluable in the battles to come. Coming off of the harsh winter, an alliance with France in 1778 marked a turning point in the war. French military and financial support bolstered the American cause, and George worked closely with French generals, including the Marquis de Lafayette. The combined forces planned and executed several successful campaigns against the British. One of the most significant victories came at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781. George Washington, with the help of French troops and the French Navy, trapped the British forces under General Cornwallis. After a grueling siege, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending the Revolutionary War. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1783, officially ended the war and recognized the independence of the United States of America. George Washington resigned his commission as Commander-in-Chief, returning to Mount Vernon with hopes of a peaceful retirement. However, his leadership and wisdom were soon called upon once again. The years following the war were marked by political instability and economic challenges. The Articles of Confederation, the nation's first governing document, proved inadequate in uniting the states and addressing the country's needs. In 1787, Washington was persuaded to attend the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. His presence lent credibility and authority to the proceedings. He was elected president of the convention, where he played a key role in shaping the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution established a federal government and judiciary with a system of checks and balances, ensuring that no single branch would have unchecked power. In 1789, George Washington was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States of America. His inauguration took place on April 30th, 1789, in New York City, the nation's temporary capital. Washington's presidency set many precedents that still guide the nation today. He established the executive branch, appointed a cabinet of advisors, and promoted policies to stabilize the economy. One of his most significant achievements was the establishment of a national financial system, spearheaded by his Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton's policies laid the groundwork for a stable economy, promoting industry and commerce. He navigated complex foreign relations, maintaining neutrality in conflicts between European powers. George Washington's leadership helped to unify the country and strengthen our fledgling government. There was much pressure for Washington to serve a life term as President of the United States, but we had just gotten done fighting a war and defeating a lifelong ruler. So after 2 terms, George Washington decided to step down from the presidency. This set a precedent that went unchallenged for nearly 150 years. When King George III heard that Washington would surrender his commission, he reportedly said that if he did this, he would be the greatest man in the world. In 1796, George Washington delivered his farewell address, offering advice and warning against political factions and foreign alliances that could divide the young nation, advice that is still important today. George Washington retired to Mount Vernon, where he spent his final years managing his estate and enjoying the company of his family. He remained a revered figure, admired for his leadership, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to the principles of liberty. Many argue that he is the founding father of the United States of America. In December 1799, George Washington fell ill with a severe throat infection. Despite the best efforts of his doctors, his condition worsened. On December 14, 1799, he passed away at the age of 67. His death was mourned by the nation, and tributes poured in from around the world, honoring his legacy as the father of his country. The founders, even Washington, were far from perfect people, but the sacrifices for independence and foresight of what our country could become is the stuff of legends. A group of young men, led by George Washington, drafted our Constitution and wrote in the preamble, "We, the people of the United States of America, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." The government that the founders established gave us the freedom to secure a more perfect union, and the principles that are found in the documents paved the way for liberty and justice for all. Good fathers aren't perfect, but they do leave a legacy that will positively impact their descendants, and the father of our nation did just that. Thanks for joining me on this History Coffee Break exploring the life of George Washington. Please subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. I always love reading them, and it's one of the best and most inexpensive ways to support the channel. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.